The first time my father made me feel like an embarrassment, he did not raise his voice. That was the part people never understood. Richard Donovan never needed volume to make a room smaller. He could do it with a pause, with a glance, with the careful way he said my name, as if it were a mistake he had learned to pronounce politely. I was 12 years old, standing near the dining room doorway in a blue dress my mother had hemmed herself, watching him introduce my little sister Natalie to a room full of neighbors. "This is Natalie," he said, one hand resting proudly on her shoulder. "She lights up every room she walks into." Natalie smiled, because that was what Natalie did. Then someone noticed me. And this must be Claire. My father's hand slipped from Natalie's shoulder, not toward me, just away from the moment. "Yes," he said, with a small laugh that asked everyone to forgive something before they knew what it was. "Claire is quieter, still figuring herself out." The room moved on. People always did. They sipped wine, smiled at my mother's flowers, asked Natalie to twirl, and let my father's sentence settle over me like dust. My mother crossed the room without making a scene and touched my wrist with 2 fingers, just enough pressure to tell me she had heard. That was how I grew up in Savannah, Georgia, in a white house 2 streets from the river, where the truth was expected to behave itself. From the outside, we looked like the kind of family people trusted. My father owned a regional insurance firm and served on enough boards to keep his name printed in programs. He believed in polished shoes, clean reputations, straight answers, and daughters who made sense. Natalie made sense. She was bright where I was watchful, graceful where I was still, easy where I was always asking why. Teachers adored her. Neighbors remembered her birthday. When people asked about me, he offered summaries that sounded harmless, unless you were the one being reduced by them. "Claire keeps to herself. Claire has a practical mind. Claire is not much for attention." None of it was technically cruel. That was what made it difficult to explain. He never said I was worthless. He simply built every room so there was no place for me to stand. I learned early that my silence made him comfortable, so I used it the way other children used manners. At dinner, I listened. At church, I stood straight. At school events, I waited until Natalie finished being admired before I asked for anything. I was not unhappy every minute, but even my best days had edges. I liked things that did not ask me to perform. I ran beside the river until my legs burned. I took apart broken radios and put them back together on the porch. "You like knowing how things hold together?" my mother said once. I shrugged because praise always made me suspicious. "Things break less when you understand them." She looked at me for a long moment. People, too. Ellen Donovan was the only person in that house who never treated my quiet like a defect. She watched me carefully and named what was true. "You notice pressure before other people do," she told me when I was 15, after I calmly guided Natalie out of the kitchen during a grease fire while my father shouted instructions that contradicted themselves. "That is not coldness, Claire. That is steadiness." My father called the incident luck. Later, he praised Natalie for being brave because she had cried afterward and hugged him in front of everyone. I remember washing the skillet while he held her and thinking that in our family, fear was visible enough to be comforted, but steadiness was invisible enough to be used. As I got older, the difference between Natalie and me became part of the family weather. Natalie joined student council, charity committees, and social clubs with names that sounded like polished silver. My father attended every event in a suit, standing behind her in photographs, as if her success confirmed something about him. I ran cross-country because I liked the honesty of distance. The clock did not care whether I smiled. The road did not ask me to explain myself. Some nights, I lay awake listening to my father's voice drift up through the floorboards. "Natalie has a future," he said once, warm with pride. "That girl knows how to carry herself." Someone asked about me. There was a pause, the kind I had learned to measure. "Claire is dependable," he said finally. "She will find her place." I pressed my palm flat against my ribs, not because I was crying, but because something inside me had tightened so hard I thought it might leave a mark. My mother came to my room later and sat at the edge of my bed. "Your father understands the world in displays," she said quietly. "He trusts what can be shown, praised, photographed, repeated at dinner." "And me?" I asked. She reached for my hand. "You are not a display, Claire. You are a structure. People like you keep things standing when everyone else is busy looking at the lights." I did not know then how long I would carry that sentence. I only knew that when she said it, I could breathe again. By 17, I had become very good at being near my family without taking up space. At Natalie's graduation party, My father moved through the house like a mayor, telling stories about her scholarships and the charity internship she had secured for the summer. I stood by the back door refilling ice buckets, wearing a white blouse my mother had ironed while apologizing with her eyes. Near the end of the evening, one of my father's old business friends, a retired colonel named Mercer, asked what I planned to do after high school. Before I could answer, my father laughed lightly and said, "We are still trying to figure out where Claire fits. Natalie was always the clear one." The retired colonel did not laugh. He looked at me instead, really looked. "And what do you think?" he asked. The question startled me because it made room for an answer. I felt my father's attention sharpen, warning without words. I could have made the room easy again. Instead, I said, "I think I work best when things are not easy." Silence followed, brief but complete. Later, after the guests left, my father found me in the kitchen. "You do not need to make cryptic statements in front of people," he said. "It makes you sound dramatic." He asked me a question. "And you could have answered normally." I looked at him and saw irritation that I had stepped outside the outline he had drawn for me. "What is normal?" I asked. He set a plate down sharply enough for my mother to turn from the sink. "Normal is knowing when the evening is not about you." There it was, the sentence under all the others. Not about you. It would follow me for years. My mother said his name softly, but he walked out as if leaving made him correct. I stayed in the kitchen until the house quieted, until my mother came and stood close enough that our shoulders touched. She did not defend him. She simply said, "Never shrink yourself just because someone else only understands small things." I turned toward her then, and something in her face made the room tilt. She was holding the edge of the counter too tightly. Her skin had gone gray beneath the soft kitchen light. "Mom?" I said. She tried to smile, but it broke before it formed. The glass slipped from her hand, struck the floor, and shattered between us. That was the night the only person who had ever truly seen me began to leave. By morning, the kitchen had been cleaned so well that it looked like nothing had happened there. And that was the first thing I learned about sickness in our house. If it could be wiped away before guests arrived, my father believed it had not truly entered. The broken glass was gone. The counter shone. My mother's chair sat pushed neatly beneath the table, as if she had simply stepped outside to cut rosemary from the garden, and would return with her hands smelling of earth. But she was upstairs behind a closed bedroom door, sleeping under medication that made her breathe too slowly, while my father stood at the stove in his dress shirt making coffee he did not drink. "It was just a spell," he said when I came in. His voice was flat, with the kind of control people mistake for strength. "Your mother has been tired." I looked at the ceiling, toward the room where she lay, and heard the pause between her breaths in my mind even though I could not hear it from there. "The doctor said she needs more tests." Doctors say many things. He poured coffee into a mug, missed slightly, and watched the dark line spread across the counter. He did not move to wipe it. "Do not upset Natalie with this yet." That sentence told me more than the appointment had. Natalie was to be protected from the weight. I was to carry it quietly. By noon, my sister knew only that Mom was resting. By dinner, I knew the name of the specialist, the date of the scan, the medication schedule, the insurance number, and the sound my mother made when pain reached a place her pride could not cover. No one assigned me the role. That was how it worked in our family. My father made decisions about appearances. Natalie kept the house warm with her brightness, and I stepped into the spaces where things might collapse. At first, I told myself that was love. It was love, partly. I loved my mother enough to learn the language of pill bottles and appointment portals, enough to sleep lightly so I could hear her call my name from the hallway, enough to memorize which soups she could keep down and which flowers made the room smell too much like apology. But love was not the whole truth. There was also an old training I had not chosen yet, a private discipline formed long before any uniform would claim me. I knew how to stay calm because panic had never helped me be seen. I knew how to read a room because my childhood had depended on noticing changes in my father's tone before they became rules. The house became a quiet operation, and I became the person who kept it moving. My father drove my mother to the first appointments, but after the third one, work grew complicated. He had meetings, calls, board commitments, people depending on him. That was how he said it, people depending on him. He did not seem to hear the sentence as I did. With my mother's calendar open on my lap and her hand trembling around a glass of water beside me, Natalie tried in her way. She brought magazines, painted Mom's nails once in a pale pink shade that made them both laugh, and cried in the bathroom where she thought no one could hear. My father praised her for staying cheerful. "Your mother needs light around her," he said at dinner one night, touching Natalie's shoulder. I was standing at the sink rinsing a measuring cup sticky with medicine. "Natalie gives her that." No one asked what I gave her, maybe because what I gave was not pretty. I gave her 2:00 a.m., towels damp with fever. I gave her rides through rain to clinics that smelled like disinfectant and old fear. I gave her my hand when the nurse could not find a vein. I gave her silence when she was too tired to accept comfort. Sometimes, in the blue hour before dawn, she would wake and find me sitting in the chair beside her bed with a textbook open but unread in my lap. "Claire," she would whisper, "you should sleep." "I am fine." She would smile with half her mouth, the other half already pulled by pain. "You always say that like it is a fact." "It is easier if it is." Once, she reached for my wrist, the same place she had touched me at parties when my father's words had landed too softly for anyone else to call them cruel. "Being strong does not mean needing nothing," she said. I looked away because there were some things I could only survive by not answering. The months narrowed. School became something I attended between emergencies. Friends stopped inviting me places after I said no too often. Natalie was accepted into a summer leadership program, and my father insisted she go, even though she offered to stay. "Your mother would not want your life interrupted," he told her. I was sitting across from them, reviewing a list of questions for the oncologist. He did not look at me when he said it. I wondered then if my life counted as already interrupted, or if it was simply not the kind of life anyone thought to protect. After Natalie left for 3 weeks, the house became quieter and more honest. My father stopped pretending at breakfast. He left early, came home late, and stood in doorways with the helpless anger of a man who had built his identity around control and found none of it useful against disease. Sometimes I pitied him. Sometimes I hated him for making me pity him. My mother understood more than she said. "He is afraid," she told me one afternoon, while sunlight trembled across the quilt. "Fear is not permission," I said before I could stop myself. Her eyes opened. For a moment, I thought she would correct me, ask me to be gentler, remind me that grief makes people clumsy. Instead, she nodded. "No," she said, "it is not." That was the closest she ever came to naming what he had done to me. Near the end, she asked me to bring down the cedar box from the top shelf of her closet. Inside were letters, old photographs, a silk scarf, and a watch that had belonged to her father, who had served in the army long before I was born. The leather band was cracked, the face scratched, the second hand still moving with stubborn precision. She placed it in my palm as if it weighed more than metal. "He wore this when he was scared," she said. "He told me courage was not a feeling. It was a decision repeated until your hand stopped shaking." I closed my fingers around it. "Mom, I do not want this yet." "I know." Her voice was thin, but her eyes were clear. "That is why I am giving it to you now." I bent over her hand and breathed like the room had forgotten how. "You are not hard to love, Claire," she whispered. "You are hard to misunderstand if someone is brave enough to look." Those were the last words she gave me that belonged only to me. At the funeral, Natalie wept openly, and everyone folded around her. My father stood near the casket accepting condolences with a face carved from stone. People told me I was strong. They said it so often that by the end of the afternoon, the word felt less like praise than a locked door. Strong meant no one had to ask if I was breaking. Strong meant I could carry the casserole dishes, answer the phone, collect the sympathy cards, and remember which relatives needed directions to the house. That night, after everyone left, I found my father in the living room staring at the blank television. "You did well today," he said. I waited, foolishly, for more. "Your sister needed that." I looked toward the staircase where Natalie had cried herself to sleep in my mother's robe. "We all did." He rubbed his face with both hands. "Do not start, Claire." The old tightening returned beneath my ribs. "Start what?" "Making everything into a judgment." I almost laughed because judgment had been the air in that house for as long as I could remember. Instead, I went upstairs and sat on my mother's side of the bed, holding the watch until the imprint of its crown marked my palm. In the weeks after, I moved through the house like someone finishing a duty no one had officially assigned. I wrote thank you notes in my mother's handwriting style because my father said people appreciated that. I packed her clothes because Natalie could not bear it. I cooked, cleaned, graduated, and waited for grief to make me softer. It did not. It made me precise. One evening in August, I placed an enlistment packet on the dining room table. My father looked at it, then at me, as if I had set down something vulgar. "What is this?" "I am joining the army." Natalie froze with her fork halfway to her mouth. My father sat back slowly. "For what?" he asked. "Because I want work that matters." His expression tightened at the edges. "You think leaving your family is noble?" "I think staying where I am useful but unseen will kill something in me." Natalie whispered my name, but I could not look at her. My father's voice dropped into that quiet register that had shaped my childhood. "You are not built for that kind of life." The sentence should have wounded me. Maybe it did, but beneath the wound, something steadier rose. I thought of my mother's hand closing mine around the watch. Courage was a decision repeated until your hands stopped shaking. Mine were not shaking. "You are wrong," I said. He stared as if I had spoken a language he had never allowed in his house. I signed the papers 2 days later. When I left Savannah before sunrise, I carried one duffel bag, my mother's watch, and the last version of myself my father would ever get to define. I did not know where the army would take me. I only knew I was done asking that house for permission to stand. The army did not welcome me with music or meaning. It welcomed me with fluorescent lights, shouted instructions, boots that rubbed skin raw before breakfast, and a kind of exhaustion so complete it stripped every person down to the truth of what they did when no one had patience left to admire them. I remember standing in formation on my 3rd morning, the Georgia heat already pressing through my uniform, sweat sliding down my spine, while a drill sergeant moved along the line looking for weakness, the way some people looked for spare change. He stopped in front of me because I was quiet. Men like him often mistook quiet for fear. My father had done the same thing for years, though with better shoes and softer lighting. "You got something to say, Donovan?" the drill sergeant barked. "No, drill sergeant." "You sure? You look like you were thinking." "Yes, drill sergeant." His eyes narrowed. "Thinking gets people hurt if it slows your feet." "Yes, drill sergeant." He waited for me to flinch. I did not. Not because I was brave, not then. I was simply used to surviving rooms where the wrong reaction cost more than the right answer. He moved on after a moment, disappointed, and I learned my first lesson. In the army, people would test what my family had already trained into me, but here the test had an end. You either completed the run or you did not. You either hit the mark or you missed it. You either carried your share or someone else paid for your failure. It was hard, but it was honest, and honesty felt cleaner than affection that came with conditions. The first weeks broke people in ordinary ways. Some cried in the latrines at night. Some grew loud to cover fear. Some became cruel because cruelty gave them a sense of control. I became precise. I folded, cleaned, ran, listened, memorized, adjusted. My body was not the strongest in the company, and I knew that from the beginning. There were women who could outrun me on hills, and men who could lift twice what I could without changing expression. But when instructions changed halfway through a task, when a map contradicted a verbal order, when weather turned a simple drill into confusion, people started looking at me. I noticed patterns before they became problems. I saw when someone was about to collapse before their knees gave out. I remembered which root had a washed-out shoulder, and which recruit had not eaten enough at dinner. At first, they called it overthinking. Then a field exercise went wrong. We were supposed to move across a training area after dark, reach a checkpoint, and regroup before dawn. It was not combat, not even close, but darkness makes amateurs honest. Rain had softened the ground, one squad took a wrong turn, and a radio battery died at exactly the wrong time. Voices sharpened. Someone cursed. Someone else insisted we keep moving east because that was what the original plan said. I stood under the trees with water dripping from my helmet and felt the old familiar shift inside me. The same quiet that had come in hospitals when my mother's oxygen numbers dipped, the same stillness that had settled over me in the kitchen after glass shattered. Panic made the world loud. My mind made it narrow. I checked the slope beneath our boots, the direction of the drainage, the faint glow beyond the pines, and the location of the access road we had crossed 40 minutes earlier. "We are too far south," I said. The squad leader snapped. "You sure?" He was not asking for confidence. He was asking whether I was willing to be responsible. I looked at the map, then at the land, then back at him. Yes, we changed direction. We found the missing squad near a low creek bed before anyone got hurt badly enough to become paperwork. The next morning, one of the instructors, Sergeant Hill, watched me longer than usual. "Donovan," he said as we packed gear, "you do not panic when the room loses its shape." I thought of my mother then so suddenly that my hands paused on the strap of my rucksack. "No, Sergeant. That is rare, he said. He walked away before I could answer, which was good because I would not have known what to do with the warmth that moved through me. It was the first time something my father had treated like strangeness was named as value by someone who had no reason to comfort me. After training, I moved into the kind of work that fit the architecture of my mind. Operations, movement, coordination, timing, risk. I learned how supplies reached people who did not have time to care where they came from. I learned how units moved through bad information and worse weather. I learned how one late convoy could change the pressure on an entire mission. The work did not look heroic from the outside. No one made movies about the person staring at maps under red light, calculating windows, checking fuel, rerouting vehicles, listening to 3 radio channels at once while pretending her pulse had not changed. But I understood it. I understood what it meant to be the person no one noticed until everything depended on whether you had been paying attention. Years passed in a rhythm that made sense to me. I earned rank quietly. I made mistakes, corrected them, and did not make the same ones twice. I learned to speak when it mattered and stay silent when noise would only feed confusion. Some officers liked applause. Some needed to be seen giving orders. I preferred results. There were commanders who underestimated me because I did not announce myself with enough force. There were peers who mistook restraint for lack of ambition. That changed after enough hard nights. Trust has a sound. It is the pause before someone says your name when things begin to fail. Get Donovan. Ask Donovan. Where is Donovan? My father called on holidays with Natalie beside him or nearby, her voice bright in the background. How is the army? He would ask, as if asking about a long business trip. Busy, I would say. Doing what exactly? Helping teams get where they need to be. He would make a satisfied sound, the kind people make when they believe a subject has remained small enough to understand. Administrative then. I let him have the word. Explaining my life to a man committed to misunderstanding it felt like pouring water into a sealed jar. Natalie tried harder. She sent pictures from charity events, from brunches, from the historic squares in Savannah glowing under Spanish moss. She wrote that she missed me, that Dad was impossible, that Mom would have hated how quiet the house had become. I believed her. I loved her, but love did not erase the fact that she had inherited the easy room, and I had built myself a life outside the house that had no place for me. When Natalie met Caleb Mercer, my father's pride returned with polished edges. Caleb came from a respected military family, worked in veterans philanthropy, and knew how to shake hands in the exact way Richard Donovan trusted. He is serious, my father told me over the phone. Grounded. Comes from good people. I was sitting in a temporary operations office hundreds of miles away, eating cold noodles from a paper cup while 2 radios muttered behind me. That is good, I said. Natalie sounds happy. She is, he replied. Then, after a pause, you should come home more. People ask about you. I almost smiled. What do you tell them? That you are still serving. Still serving. As if service were a waiting room before a real life began. That is true, I said. A few months later, I was selected for a joint operations cell that handled movements most people would never hear about unless something went wrong. The work was sharper, the margins thinner, the consequences less forgiving. On the day I received the assignment, I opened my mother's watch and listened to its small, stubborn ticking against my palm. I wanted to call her. The desire came so cleanly that for a second I forgot she was gone. Instead, I called no one. I packed my gear, signed what needed signing, and stepped into a world where names were often removed from stories for good reasons. Before I left, a cream-colored envelope arrived at my apartment with Natalie's handwriting across the front. Inside was an invitation to a black-tie charity gala in Savannah, honoring a new veterans recovery center she and Caleb had helped fund. There was a handwritten note tucked behind the card. Please come, Claire. It would mean more than you know. I held the invitation for a long time. Then I placed it in the top drawer beneath my spare rank patches, not knowing that one night in a ballroom full of donors, officers, cameras, and family, my father would finally learn what everyone else had already begun to understand. The first time I heard someone call me a hero, I was sitting on an overturned ammunition crate with mud drying on my boots, blood on my sleeve that did not belong to me, and a cup of coffee so bitter it tasted like punishment. The man who said it was young, maybe 22, with a bandage wrapped around his forehead and the stunned, glassy look people get when they have not yet understood that they are still alive. You saved us, he said, his voice rough from dust and smoke. I remember looking at him and feeling nothing dramatic, no swelling pride, no music rising under the moment, only a tired irritation at the size of the word. Hero was too clean for what had happened. Hero sounded like someone standing in sunlight. I had been in a command tent under failing lights, trying to hear broken radio traffic through wind, static, and men shouting over each other because fear had made rank suddenly very loud. No, I told him. I made a call. He stared at me as if there was a difference he could not afford to accept. Maybe there was. Maybe that was how I survived the work, by reducing impossible things into verbs. Move. Hold. Wait. Reroute. Confirm. Breathe. The operation had started with confidence, which was often how bad nights began. We were in high country, the kind of terrain that turned distance into a lie. On paper, a route looked manageable. On the ground it became rock, ice, blind corners, washed-out shoulders, and valleys that swallowed radio signals whole. A medical evacuation had been planned for an injured team pinned near a narrow pass after weather shifted faster than predicted. There were supporting units staged along 2 corridors, a convoy holding south of the ridge, and aircraft delayed by low visibility that kept changing its mind. My job was movement coordination, which meant I stood in the space between maps and human bodies, trying to make sure lines drawn in dry erase markers still meant something when rain, fear, and enemy pressure began erasing them. At 1,930, the original extraction route was still considered viable. At 1,947, it was questionable. At 2003, I knew it was dead, though no one had said the word yet. The reports came in pieces: an obstruction near the lower switchback, contact farther east than expected, a casualty count that kept adjusting because no one could hold a signal long enough to finish a sentence. The senior officer on site wanted confirmation before changing the plan. He was not wrong by regulation. Confirmation protects careers, reports, chains of command. But confirmation takes time, and time was the one resource bleeding out fastest. I stood over the map with a grease pencil in my hand, listening to voices stack on top of each other. We hold until we verify. We cannot hold. Air window is closing. Convoy is exposed if we push them west. We do not have authorization for the alternate trail. The alternate trail was barely a trail. An old service cut that had been marked unreliable in 2 separate briefings. It passed through a narrow descent where vehicles would have to move slowly and without light for part of the way. It was risky. The original route had become worse than risky. It had become a place we were sending people because the paper still remembered it as safe. That was the moment the room lost its shape. I had felt it before in smaller places. My mother's bedroom when her breathing changed, the kitchen when my father turned grief into orders, training fields when darkness made confident people brittle, panic always arrived wearing urgency. It made people demand the same answer louder. I stepped back from the table, not because I was unsure, but because I needed the whole picture, not the noise around it, the drainage lines, the weather pattern, the convoy speed, the casualty window, the eastern pressure, the radio dead zones, the fact that the unit north of the pass had enough fuel to hold for 40 more minutes if they conserved power. The fact that the medical team could move 15 minutes sooner if we shifted the rendezvous point to a dry creek bed, no one had prioritized because it looked inconvenient on the map. I heard my own voice before I fully decided to use it. Move the southern convoy to Route Gray. Shift the pickup to Creek 6. Hold the northern unit in place until the corridor opens, then collapse west. 3 people looked at me. One of them said, "That route is not approved. The approved route is compromised. We do not have final confirmation. We have enough." That was the line that could have ended my career if I was wrong. I knew it as I said it. The room seemed to narrow around my face. I was a major by then, no longer the quiet girl standing in doorways while my father explained me away. But some part of me still recognized the cost of speaking before a room had decided it was ready to hear me. The senior officer stared at the map, then at me. "You own that recommendation?" "Yes, sir." There was a pause. "Not long. Long enough. Do it." After that, the night became movement. Orders passed. Engines turned. A medic cursed into the radio. Someone lost signal and regained it with only half of the message intact. The convoy crawled through the service cut slower than I wanted, and faster than I had any right to expect. Twice, I thought the plan had failed. Once, when the lead vehicle reported loose rock under the left tires. Again, When the northern unit went silent for 7 minutes that stretched so long I could feel each second like pressure behind my teeth. I did not pray. I counted. I checked intervals. I made people repeat coordinates. I kept my voice level because voices become handrails in the dark, and if mine shook, someone else might fall. At 2,142, the first casualty reached Creek 6. At 2,158, the convoy cleared the descent. At 2,216, the last team crossed west under cloud cover just before the original route took fire. No one cheered. Real relief rarely sounds like celebration. It sounds like men sitting down too hard, like someone laughing once and then stopping, like a radio operator pressing both hands over his face because he has just realized how close the night came to naming him. I walked outside after the handoff, away from the tent, away from the map that suddenly looked innocent again. The mountains were black against a sky with no mercy in it. I checked my mother's watch. The second hand kept moving. Stubborn, precise, alive. Later, the reports would be written in language so cold it almost erased the heat from the night. Alternate movement corridor authorized under deteriorating operational conditions. Medical extraction completed. Multiple personnel recovered. No strategic assets lost. My name appeared in the appropriate places, signed, filed, reviewed, and then buried under classifications and abbreviations. That was how it was supposed to work. I did not need applause. I told myself that often enough that it became mostly true. Still, stories escaped. They always did. A sergeant told another sergeant about the major who moved a convoy before the order made sense. A medic told someone there was a woman in operations who heard the route break before everyone else did. Months later, in another country, a captain I barely knew passed me in a corridor and said, "You are the one from Gray Route." I kept walking. Depends who is asking. He smiled. People got home because of that. I did not answer because gratitude is heavy when you have nowhere to put it. Then came the message. It arrived through unofficial channels from a soldier whose name I did not recognize at first. I got home because someone made the call. I heard it was you. I read it 3 times in a room with bad lighting and a vending machine humming against the wall. Then I deleted it, not because it meant nothing, but because it meant too much and there was work waiting. Years in uniform teach you that survival does not pause for meaning. You place the feeling somewhere inside and keep moving. I did not know then that one of the men moved out of that collapsing corridor belonged to a unit connected to General Adrian Whitmore's son. I did not know the story had reached him, stripped of my face but not my name. I did not know he had asked twice who made the decision, or that when someone said, "Major Claire Donovan," he remembered it. At home, my father remembered almost nothing. When I visited Savannah once after that operation, he asked if I was still handling logistics. We were standing in his kitchen, the same kitchen where my mother had fallen, the same counters polished bright enough to deny history. Something like that, I said. He nodded, relieved by the smallness of the phrase. Natalie hugged me longer than usual that trip. She was engaged by then, glowing in a way that made it impossible not to be happy for her, even if happiness came with an ache. Caleb Mercer was polite, attentive, careful. He asked better questions than my father did, but I had become skilled at giving answers that closed doors gently. "Claire does not like talking shop," my father said, laughing as if he understood me. "Never did like attention." I watched Caleb's expression shift slightly, not enough for anyone else to notice. Maybe he heard the dismissal under the charm. Maybe he simply knew, from his own family, that military silence was not the same as emptiness. I left Savannah before dawn the next morning and returned to work that did not care what my father thought it was called. The invitation to Natalie's gala arrived 6 months later. Thick paper, gold lettering, a downtown hotel ballroom, black tie optional but clearly expected. I set it on my table and let it sit there for 2 days. Then Natalie called. "Please come," she said, softer than usual. "I know Dad can be difficult, but I want you there. Mom would want you there." That was unfair because it was true. On the night before my flight, I took out a simple black dress, packed my mother's watch, and told myself the plan was easy. Show up, congratulate my sister, stay 1 hour, leave before my father found a way to make my presence feel like a problem. I did not know that by the end of that night, the whole room would know my name. The ballroom looked like the kind of place my father trusted. Everything in it had been arranged to prove something. Tall windows draped in ivory silk, Chandeliers warming the polished floor, white roses in glass vases, a string quartet near the staircase, donors moving with champagne in their hands, and careful concern on their faces. On a banner beside the stage, Natalie's name appeared beside Caleb's under the words Savannah Veterans Recovery Initiative. My sister had done something good. I wanted that to be the first truth I carried into the room. Not my father's voice. Not the old tension under my ribs. Just Natalie, glowing near the front in a silver dress, laughing as Caleb adjusted the microphone on the podium. She saw me before anyone else did. Her smile changed when it reached me, losing its public shine and becoming the one I remembered from childhood. Softer, relieved, real. "Claire," she said, crossing the room faster than her heels wanted her to. She wrapped both arms around me and held on. For a few seconds, the room fell away. "You came. You asked." She pulled back, eyes bright. "You look beautiful," I smiled faintly. "You look like the committee approved you." She laughed, and something in me loosened. I had chosen a simple black dress, formal enough not to insult the evening, plain enough to disappear. My mother's watch sat under my sleeve. No medals, no uniform, nothing that asked the room to recognize a version of me my family had never learned. That was the plan. Be present. Congratulate Natalie. Stay 1 hour. Leave before my father could turn my existence into a complication. Then I saw him. Richard Donovan stood near the sponsor table in a tailored navy suit, one hand on Caleb's shoulder, the other around a glass of water he would never finish. He was laughing with a judge, a hospital board member, and 2 men whose posture marked them as retired officers before I saw their lapel pins. My father looked good in public. Rooms like this gave him back the man he preferred to be, respected, composed, useful, central. His eyes moved across the ballroom and found me. The laugh stayed on his face for 1 beat too long. Then it froze. Natalie followed my gaze and stiffened. "He promised," she whispered. "Promises are easy before the room fills up." "Claire, it is fine." That was another phrase I had carried too long. My father approached without hurry. He did not look angry. Anger would have been easier. He looked inconvenienced, as if I were an error in the seating chart. "Claire," he said, kissing the air near my cheek because people were watching. "I am glad you could make it. Dad." His eyes dropped briefly to my dress, then over my shoulder to see who had noticed us. "Natalie, sweetheart, they need you near the stage. The program begins in 10. Natalie did not move. "I want Claire at our table." His smile tightened. "Of course. We will sort that out." I knew what that meant. Natalie did too, but Caleb called her name from the podium before she could answer. She squeezed my wrist. "Do not leave," she said. I nodded because I meant to try. My father waited until she was gone, then guided me with 2 fingers at my elbow toward a side corridor lined with framed photographs of old Savannah streets. The music softened behind us. The air changed. Away from the tables and cameras, his public warmth slipped off. "Why did you not tell us you were coming this early?" he asked. The invitation had a start time. "Do not be literal." He inhaled through his nose, the way he did when he wanted to believe he was being patient. "Tonight matters to your sister. There will be important people here. I do not want awkward questions." I looked at him. "About what?" "About you." He said it softly, almost regretfully, as if I had placed him in an unfair position by existing without a simple explanation. The old kitchen, the graduation party, the sentence about not making the evening about me. All of it came back so cleanly, I could almost smell dish soap and broken glass. "What would be awkward?" I asked. "You know how you are." "No," I said. "Tell me." His jaw moved once. Private, difficult to read. You disappear for years and then arrive at something like this with no context. People ask what you do, where you have been, why you are not more involved. It becomes uncomfortable. For them, for the family, there it was. The family, which so often meant the story he wanted to tell about us. I looked past him toward the ballroom where Natalie stood in the light, smiling because people needed her to. "I came for Natalie. Then do not make her manage you." The words landed quietly, which was how his worst ones always did. I felt the familiar tightening beneath my ribs, but now it meant something harder than pain. Years of operations rooms, years of standing over maps while people argued with reality. Years of learning that a calm voice did not have to mean surrender. "I have not asked anyone to manage me," I said. "Claire, do not turn this into a confrontation. I am standing in a hallway. He glanced toward the ballroom. Lower your voice. I almost laughed. My voice had not risen. It never needed to. He stepped closer, cologne sharp and expensive. Just stay near the back. Congratulate your sister after the speeches. Then, if you need to leave early, no one will take it personally. No one. He meant him. He meant the guests. He meant the version of Natalie's night that worked better if I remained a shadow with good manners. I touched the edge of my mother's watch under my sleeve. The second hand moved against my pulse. You are right, I said. Relief flickered across his face too quickly. Good. I will congratulate her now and go. The relief vanished. That is not what I meant. It is what I can do. I stepped around him before he found another sentence. The ballroom seemed brighter when I returned. Too bright. All gold and white and expectation. I moved along the edge of the room. Past the gift table. Past a photographer checking his lens. Past donors laughing, as if generosity had made them weightless. My plan narrowed. Find Natalie. Tell her I was proud. Leave before disappointment became public. I had almost reached the side exit when Caleb saw me. He was near the stage with a stack of program cards in one hand, listening to a staff member whisper into his ear. His gaze touched my face, moved away, then snapped back with sudden force. The color left him so fast I thought he might be ill. Not nervous, not confused, recognizing. He looked toward the head table where an older man sat beneath the soft light, speaking quietly with two uniformed officers. Even in a tuxedo, General Adrian Whitmore carried rank like weather. Caleb crossed to him quickly, bending close. I could not hear the words over the quartet, but I saw his mouth form my name. The general went still. Then his head turned. His eyes found me across the ballroom, and the room, though it did not know it yet, began to change shape. He stood. Conversations thinned. Chairs shifted. My father, halfway between the corridor and the sponsor table, stopped as if someone had called him by a name he did not want to answer. General Whitmore did not look at him. He walked directly toward me, unhurried, exact, every step making the silence wider. I did not move. Instead, I stood near the side exit with my coat over my arm, my mother's watch ticking under my sleeve, as a four-star general stopped in front of me, straightened his jacket, raised his hand in a clean, formal salute, and said in a voice the whole ballroom could hear, "Major Donovan, I have waited years to thank you in person." The silence that followed General Whitmore's salute did not fall over the ballroom all at once. It moved through the room in layers, starting with the people nearest us, then spreading past the tables, past the donors with champagne halfway to their mouths, past the officers who had been speaking quietly near the stage, until even the string quartet let the final note die without knowing whether they were supposed to continue. I stood near the side exit with my coat over my arm and my mother's watch ticking against my wrist, and for one strange second I felt 12 years old again, waiting for my father to explain me to a room that had not asked. But this time no one looked at him first. They looked at me. General Whitmore held the salute with the kind of precision that made movement around it feel disrespectful. My body responded before my mind caught up. I straightened, brought my hand up, and returned it the way I had been taught, clean and sharp. Not for the ballroom, not for my father, but for the men and women whose names would never appear in a gala program, and for every quiet decision that had carried someone home. When my hand dropped, the general lowered his. His eyes did not soften, exactly. Men like him did not soften in public, but something in his face changed, a guarded warmth, a weight finally set down where it belonged. "Sir," I said, because old habits do not ask permission. "Major Donovan," he replied, clear enough that the room had no choice but to hear him. "There are people alive today because you were willing to make a decision when waiting would have cost lives." I felt the words move through the ballroom like a pressure wave. Somewhere behind me, someone drew in a breath. Near the sponsor table, my father stood completely still. I did not turn toward him. I did not need to. I could feel him the way you can feel weather changing before the rain reaches your skin. "I only did my job," I said quietly. The general's mouth moved in the smallest, almost smile. That is what the best ones always say. Then he turned, not away from me, but toward the room, and the entire ballroom shifted with him. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said without a microphone, without effort, "forgive the interruption. I know this evening belongs to the Savannah Veterans Recovery Initiative, to Natalie Donovan and Caleb Mercer, and to the work being done for those who come home carrying more than the eye can see. That work matters. Natalie stood near the podium with both hands pressed together at her waist, her face pale with confusion and dawning understanding. Caleb was beside her, eyes bright, watching his father with the look of a man who had just seen two parts of his world collide and finally make sense. The general continued. But it would be a poor tribute to service if we stood in a room like this, speaking of sacrifice and recovery, and failed to recognize one of our own standing quietly at the edge of it. I wanted to step back. Every instinct in me wanted distance, shadow, the old useful invisibility. I had not come to be a symbol. I had not come to correct my father in public. I had come because my sister had asked me to, because my mother would have wanted me to stand somewhere inside the family even if the family did not know how to make room. But the general did not let the moment become spectacle. He did not name the operation. He did not expose classified details. He did not turn pain into entertainment. He simply placed truth in the center of the room and left it there. Years ago, he said, under conditions I will not describe, a coordinated evacuation was collapsing. Weather, terrain, timing, and pressure had turned a plan into a hazard. People were waiting for certainty that was not coming. Major Claire Donovan made the call. Because of that call, sons came home. Daughters came home. Husbands, wives, fathers, friends. Some of those families never knew her name. Tonight, you do. The room was no longer quiet because it was shocked. It was quiet because it was listening. That difference mattered. I looked at Natalie then, and her eyes filled, not with pity, not with embarrassment, with recognition that had arrived late, but, honestly, my father was still by the sponsor table. His face had lost its public polish. For the first time in my life, Richard Donovan looked like a man standing in a room he could not control. The general glanced toward the stage, then back at the crowd. I will not ask Major Donovan to speak, he said. Those who carry the most often say the least. But I will ask this room to do one simple thing. Stand for the kind of service that does not ask to be seen before it does what is right. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then Caleb stood first. Natalie followed, slower, one hand over her mouth. The officers rose next, chairs sliding back with a low, solemn scrape. Then the donors, the board members, the staff near the walls, the photographer who lowered his camera instead of taking the shot. Finally, my father stood. He did not look at me at first. His hand gripped the back of his chair as if the polished wood were the only solid thing left in the room. Then he raised his eyes. I did not see pride there, not yet. Pride would have been too easy. I saw shock, shame, and something more painful than both. The beginning of understanding. Applause came, but softly, unevenly, not the bright applause of performance. It was a sound people made because they did not know what else to do with respect once it filled their hands. I stood through it without smiling. Not because I was ungrateful, but because the moment was larger than comfort. Beneath my sleeve, my mother's watch kept ticking. I thought of her in the kitchen, telling me never to shrink myself just because someone else only understood small things. I wondered if she would have smiled. I think she would have cried first. The program continued after that because public events always find a way to keep moving. Natalie gave her speech with a trembling voice and more honesty than polish. She spoke about recovery, about invisible burdens, about how families often misunderstand strength when it does not look the way they expect. She did not say my name again. She did not need to. My father sat through dinner like a man hearing every fork touch every plate. Relatives who had once asked me vague questions about when I would settle down now avoided my eyes or offered careful smiles. I did not punish them. I did not rescue them either. After the final toast, I stepped out onto a balcony overlooking the dark line of the river. The Savannah night was warm, heavy with flowers and rain not yet fallen. I let my shoulders lower for the first time all evening. The door opened behind me. I knew my father's steps before he spoke. Claire. I kept my hands on the railing. Dad. He stopped a few feet away. For once, he did not rush to fill the silence with authority. I did not know, he said. The words were familiar, but this time they carried less defense. No, I said. You did not, he swallowed. You could have told me. I turned then. You could have asked. That landed harder than I expected. He looked down, and in the balcony light, he seemed older, not weak, just stripped of the performance that had carried him for so long. I thought I understood enough. You understood what was convenient. He nodded once, slowly, and the fact that he did not argue told me something had truly shifted. I made you small, he said. The sentence came out rough, as if each word had edges. Because I did not know how to explain you. I was never built to be easy for you to explain. His eyes shone, but he held himself still. No, you were not. I looked back toward the ballroom, where Natalie was laughing through tears while Caleb held her hand. I am not asking you to understand every part of my life, I said. I am asking you to stop calling it less just because it does not serve the story you want to tell. He closed his eyes briefly. I do not know how to fix this. Then do not try to fix it tonight. My voice stayed level. Start by not breaking it again. He nodded. I can do that. And do not speak for me in rooms I am standing in. He looked at me then, really looked, as if seeing me required effort he should have made years ago. I will not make you smaller again, he said. It was not enough to erase the past. Nothing said on a balcony after a public reckoning could do that, but it was enough to mark a line. The next morning, we met at a diner before my flight. No speeches. No dramatic forgiveness. Eggs, toast, coffee, two people learning how to sit across from each other without old roles doing all the talking. When I left, he did not ask me to stay longer so he could feel better. He simply stood beside his car and said, "Drive safe, Major." I almost smiled at the title. Goodbye, Dad. On the highway out of Savannah, the city fell behind me in soft green and gold, the river flashing once between the trees before disappearing. I rested one hand on the wheel and one thumb against my mother's watch. For years, I had thought being seen would feel like victory. It did not. It felt quieter than that. It felt like air returning to a room that had been closed too long. If you have ever been made to feel like the smallest person in a room, if someone you loved taught you to hide your worth because they did not know how to honor it, remember this. You do not need their permission to stand straight. You do not need applause to prove that your life matters. Sometimes justice is not revenge. Sometimes it is simply the moment truth enters the room and refuses to leave. If this story touched something in you, tell me where you are watching from and what part stayed with you. Leave a comment, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe for more stories about quiet strength, hidden courage, and the kind of dignity no one can take away. Until next time, stand tall. Your story matters.